And who do we have on the show this week? Mr. Scott Rea, president of AvatarFleet. And Scott says things like, I hate empty trucks. I hate that you turn down loads. The only thing I hate more is how drivers tend to be treated in the trucking industry. The customer is not always right in trucking because their delays, mistakes, and lack of empathy hurt the driver's paycheck. Your mistakes in dispatching, training, compliance hurt the driver's paycheck. Construction, traffic jams, and the lack of parking spaces all hurt the driver's paycheck. The driver is on a commission job where the majority of issues are outside of his or her control. The customer used to always be right and was always prioritized ahead of the driver. You can't operate that way anymore. Every decision you make needs to be driver-centric. Scott Rea. Welcome to the Dog On It Trucking Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Harris, Safety Dawg. And when it comes to trucking safety, the dog is on it. What are you getting when you listen or watch this podcast? I am so privileged to be able to sit and discuss with a variety of trucking influencers a wide range of trucking topics. And you get to hear their perspective on an enormous range of issues. Please, if you would show your appreciation for the podcast by leaving a thumbs up, a comment, a rating, depending on the platform of your choice that you're listening or watching with. It would help me so much raise the profile of this show and bring it and make it available to even more listeners. So thank you very much. I appreciate you and your time that takes. Now, let's get on with the show. I'm so excited to have Scott Rea. Scott, how are you?
I'm excellent. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You're now my second American to have on the show, and I will expand on that, of course. Heather Fry was on last week, so just so you know, and she's the Truckers Against Trafficking.
Right, yep.
And so it's
got a chance to meet her last week as well.
Yeah, at the TTSAO conference.
Yes, sir.
So, AvatarFleet, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what AvatarFleet's all about?
Sure thing. So I'm the president of AvatarFleet, and what we do is we help transportation companies with driver recruiting, compliance, training, and retention. So we're going about that with either software or services to help fill the funnel, stay out of the crosshairs of the federales, train them up once you've got them. And that can be from training experienced drivers or turning newbies into seasoned pros. And you've invested a lot of time and energy by the time you've done all that. So we think you should keep them as well.
Well, I was going to say, what would be one of the challenges of recruiting, what's one of the challenges of retaining drivers today?
Well, it's obviously an easier said than done component. A lot of times with retention, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and that's the event that's focused on. But anyone trying to figure out from a macro level what's happening, if you focus on that single event, you're probably missing the picture. And so I would say the single biggest challenge, as well as the thing that helps the most, is a regimented check-in process, preventing those straws from breaking the camel's back in the beginning. And so while it's complicated to execute, but a regimented process of check-ins from the dispatcher or driver manager that has nothing to do with the load that day, but how you doing, combining with these are the expectations that we set, and not just doing it once a quarter, but talking about it weekly. And someone from payroll in that first week, Chris, your first check's coming in the mail. Let's talk through, make sure you understand it, you know how to read it, you can interpret it, that it lines with what you thought. And how about a call from the president? So if you kind of see my point of these check-in points, a lot of times the driver doesn't want to ask or tell you if something is itching them. you got to go out and ask them. And it's not a survey. And then maybe it's a text, maybe it's a phone call, depends on who that driver is. But you got to start it off. And that's what we've seen is if you're not initiating it, you're not going to hear from them.
So what I think I heard was um, not hand holding, but a little more reaching out, being proactive, and saying hi to the driver when it's not about the load that particular day. It's just
Mm-hmm.
about how in the heck are you?
Mm-hmm.
I, partic-
Absolutely.
I particularly like the thought of the president phoning somebody in the first week or several days, perhaps. What would the president say to a fellow if he, to welcome him onto the fleet?
Yeah, we love doing it in the first couple weeks. And, it can be as simple as a welcome. Chris, glad to have you on board. Really glad you're a part of the team. Um, Wish to let you know that we really appreciate you. Here's some things that are important to us. Here's a little bit of our company history. Here's our mission, vision, values. And, just excited to make you part of the family. It could be a 2-minute phone call, but think about how many company presidents aren't making that 2-minute phone call. I think that helps you stand out from the pack.
I can't think of any company presidents that are making the phone call, at least not in my community. Um, so, how does Avatar Fleet reach out to help uh, set some of these things in motion?
Yeah, so simply put, we're actually not the ones making the phone calls as we are building the software to track that process. So that's actually something that is not something that we've built, but we've got a couple of clients that are pushing us in that direction. And the short story, Chris, is I've just seen a lot of it. We've got a handful that do it. We recommended it. They said, good idea. Should I do that, Scott? And I said, well, the old school way is Excel sheets, and that's at least you're doing it, but that gets cumbersome. And so what we're working on with a couple of clients right now is mapping out what that would look like, after you've hired somebody.
So that's
So if you got any friends that would like to help sketch it out, we're looking for them.
well, I'm hoping to get you some help through this, But so compliance training, you're talking here about training the president and dispatchers and payroll people. Um, Probably not training so much as educating in this case. How would you go about training? What does Avatar do for training of drivers?
Sure, and actually, I would say that what we do have available is leadership development. So that is training for those folks, the driver manager, the president, and that's where some of those concepts came from. The tool I was talking about was more from a company that goes through our leadership development program and said that's a really good idea. Now that tool was about the implementation of said good idea. And on the training side, we do 3 flavors: online, self-directed, a train the trainer process called LLC instructor and driver certification, and finishing school. So again, hiring someone from, say, a TTSAO school and turning that new student into a seasoned pro.
Okay, so you're talking about a new grad now,
Mm-hmm.
maybe coming from a TTSAO school or from a PTDI school. Got
Yep,
to keep my American friends happy. Come
absolutely.
on. um, so, what would the process look like for hiring a brand new or a driver with less than a year's experience look like from Avatar Fleet's point of view?
Well, yeah, and it's actually PTDI's point of view as well. So we work together with PTDI on this curriculum. And first thing is, in order to execute a curriculum, you need a small army, whether that's 1, 2, or 15, depending on your size, of instructors. And so, Chris, you're familiar with the CCC
Yes.
instructor certification program. So we'll put you on the spot. Can you rattle off CCC, what it stands for?
Oh, you have put me on the spot, but look ahead, leave room, look around, and communicate.
All right, good. Because if you didn't remember, was going to completely disprove my point, which is it's an easier process of what we built. And as you can see, those components rattle off nicely if you're doing commentary driving, both from the instructor and the driver standpoint. So anyways, a guy like you, Chris, would get certified, and you actually have helped us create other CCC instructors. And what we've done is create a deeper level called finishing school instructor. And that was what we did in concert with PTDI, where we're taking a deeper dive on the different types of personalities that you're going to see out there. We're going to talk about different learning styles and different teaching styles specifically for an adult learner, and not only an adult learner, a truck driver. And that is very different than teaching a fifth grader, as anyone with kids knows. So we talk about those different personalities, those different concepts, and relay them specifically to the truck driving profession. What was your take, Chris, after going through it?
Well, the Triple LC program I really liked because for several reasons. It was simple. A lot of it was done online, and then I got to meet with your partner, I think, Mark, and he came up for a half a day of training, I believe, and then we went for a drive in the afternoon where we all got to participate in the 3 different functions or roles that an instructor would go through. And that was a learning experience because I myself had never done and never been taught commentary driving, which, can you explain to our viewers and watchers what commentary driving is?
Sure. One client, he called it a disease in a good way because once he got it in his brain, he couldn't stop it. And so, simply put, everywhere in our head, there's a running commentary, and that's the only way that we can understand what's going on, Chris, in a trainee's noodle. What's happening in their head. And so what commentary driving is simply that, describing what you see as you're driving so the instructor understands. So what it might sound like is I'm looking ahead, establishing a safe following distance. I'm going to leave room. Let's count it off. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we've got a safe following distance. I'm looking around, checking my mirrors every 3 to 5 seconds. And one of your colleagues and the TTSA Instructor of the Year, Doug, he had a question that stuck with me where he said, "Hey, Scotty, what color was that car on the on-ramp?" And my response to him was, "What car?" And he goes, "Exactly. Check your mirrors more often." And so that's a good example of a good instructor is not one that tells you what to see, but in between your commentary driving, ask that right question to get you thinking, because self-realization is the goal.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the way drivers of both cars and trucks operate today, if you're not driving on the defensive, you're in for big trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's Avatar's approach to driver recruiting?
Yeah, in one phrase would be the purple cow. And for those of Mr. Seth Godin, that's right. And that's all about differentiation. So from my experience recruiting truck drivers, there's a lot of people saying the same thing. I call it the sea of sameness. And meaning at Scott's trucking company and Chris's trucking company, if I can put your logo, Chris, on my ad and everything applies, well, that's not a very effective ad. That might as well be advertising for you.
Yeah.
And so my point is, you see, we're going to treat you with respect, great home time, great pay. Well, what does that really mean? And one, that's also in the eye of the beholder, but that's nothing specific about that. So that's the first piece, is the message, your unique pitch, the purple cow. And then the other side, in order to know what's working, you need to, A, make it frictionless to apply, whether you're in the States or Canada. The Ministry of Transportation and the Department of Transportation have made it difficult because they just made it a long, cumbersome process. So you've got to make it simple. And typically for a 55-year-old, that's the average age in the States. Not sure if it's the same up north.
Might be a little older up here.
So, not tech-savvy guys like us, Chris, like we were struggling to get on the Skype meeting, but we got to make them so that a 55-year-old can get through that app on his phone. What we've seen is that 95% of last year applied on a mobile device. That was within our software.
Sorry, what was that percentage again?
95.
Wow.
And that cuts across, that's truckload, less than truckload, that's motor coach, that's school bus, urban, rural. If you think about it, it's a mobile workforce. So you've got to meet them where they are.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, that's huge and shocking. Although in some ways, maybe not shocking, that a lot of drivers can't use a computer very well because they don't work in an office, or they're working in their truck. And a computer to them is an ELD system, basically. They've never had the opportunity really to to have a keyboard. It's the mobile number of 95%, though. That's huge. That
So we've got
shocks me.
so many clients that are coming from a paper process to electronic. They see a big jump for that simple reason is they've expanded their hiring radius. And what I mean by that is, we've got some clients that you had to walk in the door during the hours of 9 to 5 to apply. Well, who can do that? A driver who's unemployed. So is that the driver that you really want? Probably not. You want the driver who's working during the day, who is on the other side of the country because he got stuck out there, missing his son's baseball game or football game or whatever it is, and he's using that time when he's frustrated is when he's going to be motivated to apply. So take advantage of that opportunity. Don't make him come in and walk by the shop because he might say, screw it, because he can go anywhere he wants. And the companies that have that online application that's mobile first are going to get that candidate.
Well, and I was reading in the paper today about a large U.S. retailer who is planning to expand their hiring. And so when you talk about having to stand out, when you're competing against somebody like that, how do you stand out? What are some of the tricks of the trade that you can share? There may be some that you don't want to share until they're customers, but what can you tell us about good recruiting techniques?
Yeah, so the simple concept is one man's trash is another man's treasure. So don't get hooked up trying to compete with, say, a large retailer, because that may not be the right thing for what gets your drivers excited. So there's a simple tool that we use called defining your driver personas. And if anyone's interested, Chris, I'm happy to give a link for your listeners to download. And the reason why I start here is this process of creating your personas allows you to understand what are the 3 to 5 personas you're going to market to. And I guess I'll describe personas. And think about it as a way to organize a group of people.
Okay.
And kind of like a mass group of people, so you can give a more tailored message to a group of people that feels like it really hits home to them. So, typically speaking, maybe it's. I'll give 3 examples I've seen. I've seen like there's an OTR position, a regional position, a local position. Well, those jobs solve different problems for different people. So what you really understand is for those personas, what are their challenges? What are their goals in life? How can you help them overcome their challenges to hit their goals? How does that job help them do that? And so usually in trucking, it's centered around someone's, like your job title is typically how it's organized. But by really understanding who that person is, what motivates, what makes them tick, allows you to create a message that resonates with them. And so the simple thing is, I always say look at the competition and see what they're doing, but start first with your existing drivers. What is it they love working about your place? Some guy named Bob has been there for 10 years and he loves it here and he's planning on retiring. Well, what is it that's causing Bob to stay here? What makes him love his job? Let's go find 10 more Bobs.
Right.
And so as you build your personas, we like to put names to them. And so if you would just want to call it Bob Jones, because you have you've been in meetings, right? It's everyone goes, well, we want, like Bob. Why can't we be like Bob? Well, let's go be intentional about finding Bob.
Yeah, and that would be one, different, 2, very strategic. One of the things you just mentioned about personas, why would I be advertising to over-the-road drivers when I want regional drivers, for instance?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
as you said, different things appeal to different drivers depending on what their needs and wants are.
Yeah, if I can provide a specific example there. So, I came from a carrier where we were offering a guaranteed paycheck, which in the regional side was pretty unique. And we were doing $1,200 a week. And I remember on the ads on Facebook that we served up, a driver said, $60 a year, I can't even eat on that. Hey, that's okay. You're not our guy. Right? So we didn't lose any sleep that whoever that was thought that was a crappy job, because he wasn't who we were going after. The pain point we were trying to solve was not the high dollar job, because there were higher dollar jobs.
Right.
Probably some of that retailer that you described. But what we could guarantee was, hey, we could guarantee weekly home time, and you knew your paycheck was going to be a flat amount. And some people with a family, and this is what we discovered, people with a family wanted that, they valued that consistent paycheck. They could provide for that, they could make their F-150 payment, their mortgage, put their kids through school. The up and down was what killed them. And so they were willing to take, maybe I don't make 80 this year, but I know I'm going to make 60. And I know I'm not going to make 50. And that was important to them.
Yeah, I would think anybody with wives and kids, that would be a huge bonus if you can, spell it out like that. So, what aren't companies doing in a recruiting frame of mind that you see way too frequently? Um, you probably have you in Canada here. We have a magazine called Over the Road. I know
Hmm.
it's down in the States as well, but we have a different. It's a different magazine, same name, but it's a recruiting for truck driver magazine. What do you see in that type of magazine that carriers aren't doing, or maybe they're doing well?
Yeah. So, the first thing I guess would be the where you spend your money is important. And just asking the driver, how'd you hear about us, isn't always a reliable source. So we used to get responses like the internet. Well, that's not helpful. Someone might also say Indeed. Well, there's other jobs boards out there that will aggregate. They're called aggregators, and they'll post on Indeed. So to the driver's defense, she or he clicked on the Indeed ad. How was he or she to know that that was actually an all truck jobs ad or whatever?
Right.
So you got to have the digital tracking. You got to have the tracking in place, so you know exactly where to spend your money. Because if you're doing one step over flying blind. But so to answer your questions, I see a lot of flying blind out there, and at best they're asking, how'd you hear about us? And that's not reliable. And with the tracking links and software like what we have, use it. Any good applicant tracking system for truck drivers has got those links, and you got to be using that so you know where to spend your money. So that's part one. Don't fly blind. Part two is again, depends on your personas and who you're going after, but there's a lot. Everyone is looking for that younger driver. And Chris, remember, I think his name was Lou, who gave a presentation from one of those magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, look at the numbers here of millennials that are reading our newspaper. And it was in the single digits. And his takeaway was, if you're going to be advertising with us and you want to get a younger viewer, if you're going print, you're going to be sorely disappointed. And this was the guy who has the magazine, right?
Yep.
So digital is the way to go for not only the younger generation, but I will go back to that stat of why did 95% of our clients apply online? Well, part of it is we're pushing them in that direction for two reasons. The first is I think that's truly where they are. And there are a lot of truck drivers. We got in the States, there's over 1.5 million truck drivers on Facebook. So they're there. If you look at, so that's kind of part one is as you're picking where to go, though, part two, this is the concept of Moneyball that I share the TTSEO presentation, which is what you're looking for. And again, when you're trying to compete with that, say that retailer, they're spending buku bucks on advertising. And some of the large for-hire fleets, their budgets, their monthly recruiting budget, we're talking $1 million a month for some of these guys. So we've got carriers spending more money on advertising than some of the folks listening on this make in that year. So how do you compete with that? The analogy is, hey, that's the A's, or the Tampa Bay Rays. How do we compete when we just don't have that same budget?
Right.
And that digital advertising levels the playing field. Because if I want to go buy an ad in that newspaper, it's the same price for everyone. But on the digital advertising standpoint, if you're doing your keyword research properly, you can find value, low cost per clicks that the big dogs haven't figured out yet. And it's an open playing field. It's not just biggest pocketbook wins.
Yeah.
Smarter, the more nimble, smart, shiftier folks, you can get in there and compete.
Well, just recently I've started to do a lot more work on what you just mentioned, keyword research, not for driver recruiting, because that's not my business, but for one of the other things. And of course, I'm a small guy, and I need to compete against some of the bigger guys who their advertising budget, as you say, would be, God, it's 100 times mine. So I have to be very selective, and I want to dominate a keyword perhaps, as opposed to trying to be everywhere to everybody.
That's exactly right. Yep. Pick your 1 to 5 and dominate.
Yeah, and that's what it's interesting. I'm just learning so much more about this kind of stuff. Um, but let's change subjects a little. Well, before we change subjects, anything else you want to mention about recruiting? And then we'll get into compliance. But how does Avatar help a company be a better recruiter?
It's the tool, simply put.
So
So
Avatar has a tool.
yeah, yep. So it's for designed. The space is the applicant tracking system, and some of those pieces and parts that I mentioned are the marketing side. We can give you processes and ebooks and templates to follow, but that's really you and your organization creating that message. Where we're going to is how can you distribute that message? So integration with jobs boards, Indeed, things like that. And when it's out there, how do you track it so you know where they're coming from and where to spend your money next month? And then going back to that, make it easy to apply. How can you reduce friction? How can you make it simple to capture a bunch of paperwork on a phone for someone who's in their 50s? And then the final piece is more touches every day. If you can send out 10 more texts a day or make 10 more phone calls because you're talking with the right people, or we've done some automation through sending off mass messages. What are ways that you can do more each day because you've got tools that eliminate the busy work and keep you focused on contact with live bodies, whether that's a phone call, an interview. How can we eliminate data entry so you're not spending 10 minutes to run a background screen, you're spending 10 minutes to call 5 more prospects. So that's what that software is all about.
Well, that's cool because, I can see a lot of carriers. Well, I've seen their recruiting processes, and they're not good. Just to be polite. But anyways, compliance. What is Avatar doing in the area of compliance that you can share with us?
So it's similar theme, which is automation of the busy work. And as anyone knows that's brought on a driver, you're managing a driver qualification file, regardless of which side of the border you're on, there's certain documents that are required. And what we see a lot is, hey, we've hired someone, let's shove a bunch of paperwork in front of them. We're going to waste 2 hours of orientation, signing and filling paper.
Just 2 hours of orientation?
We've seen 4, but 2 is the average. It's like signing your mortgage, right? I actually think the mortgage might be more fun than some of the paperwork I've seen.
Yeah.
At least you're getting a house at the end of that one. How can you, if you look at any of those applications, MOT or DOT compliant, we know a lot about you because it's a pretty hefty application. And then we're going to ask you to write that same information in a piece of paper 10 more, 100 more times. So that's how we take that down to 15 minutes is we just pre-populate all the information we already know about you, have you electronically sign it. Some people do it before orientation, some people do it during, but regardless, you're taking it from 2 hours to 15 minutes. The nice thing about that is that what our best clients are inserting our driver training in that 2 hours that they just got back. Now you're doing, or giving a big hug and welcome them to the family. Maybe the president takes that time and walks in to say hello, does that in person as opposed to on the phone. Do anything better except for signing paperwork. You got a lot of options.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen carriers with an orientation. 2 hours is minimal. I've seen 2 days. I know of one carrier that's closer to 5 days. And the problem I have with not the 5-day program, but the 1 day and less programs, often the driver's not even getting paid to attend and be there for that.
Mm-hmm.
Which it's got to affect your retention, your recruiting prospects, everything.
Yeah, you want to start off on the right foot.
Yeah, because I think abusing drivers, to be mean, that's the shippers and the receivers' jobs. We shouldn't be abusing our own employees and workers. So
yeah, they get enough flack. Yeah. So
it's terrible.
So that's part one to it. And then part two is after you've brought someone on board, you're required to keep up with expiring documents such as their license, an abstract, MVR. certificate of violations, anything that expires. So a reminder system, simply put. So text the driver, ask for a copy of that new license. You put it in its nice little home. You can view it. And if you ever get an audit, God forbid, we'll knock on the wood that no one gets one this week, that you've got it all in one place. So he said the auditor come in and say, I'd like to see Chris and Scott and Larry and Joe and Fred, and I'd like to see these 5 records. You can tee that up and present it to him. We've actually had an auditor complete it from his hotel room in his pajamas. He was a lot happier. Our client was a lot happier. And it's all about getting that auditor out the door quicker.
And nobody had to see the auditor in their pajamas.
That's right.
Well, some of these auditors, I wouldn't want to see them in their...
No, unless you're Skyping them in like this.
Yeah. So that's cool. So you do a lot of work in compliance. What are some of the strategies an Avatar client might use for driver retention?
Yeah. So, we hit on that check-in process in the beginning, and the reason why I started there is I really think that's a nice bang for your buck. And it just works. I've seen it work in many clients, many different sectors of transportation. Another simple thing, Chris, is it's not even a software. It's a piece of paper, and it's what we call an expectations document. And just by setting the expectations on day one that says, Mr. Driver, this is what we expect of you, and then almost equally importantly, this is what you can expect of us, and we both sign this document together. That there shows it's a level playing field. Going back to when you say we treat you with respect, that's a very broad, platitude-filled statement. Here's a really good example of we're setting the tone up front. It eliminates confusion, and again, we're trying to eliminate those straws that break the camel back. And that's been a really simple tool and we look at it every month, that driver manager can have that conversation. And if anyone goes awry, either way, the driver or the driver manager, you've got a tool. And what's beauty, there's a term out there called triangulation. And so by putting that paper out there, Chris, you and I are looking at this paper saying, hey, someone's not living up to their expectation here.
Right.
How can we work together to solve that? And just by us being on the same side, looking at that thing helps eliminate some of any conflict that could be perceived to be building up. And we're just working together to solve a problem as a team, not me versus you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that sounds a heck of a lot better than the fleets that I've driven for in the past, because there was no conversation really going back and forth.
Yeah. Did you ever have any structure to those one-to-ones, Chris, or was that not even a thing? There was never, it wasn't even a 15 or 20-minute monthly, hello, how are you doing?
No, there was never that type of feedback. I mean, I often saw my dispatcher, but it was just to pick up the paperwork, not really to talk, just, here it is, get out the door, get going to work.
Right.
We had to have annual reviews, but that's what it was annual. It was a piece of paper only. You're familiar with the document from the DOT, pretty much. We use the same thing in Canada, and it wasn't even a one-on-one interview.
Right.
Did it make you stay? No, I don't think it was a good retention strategy.
It was a compliance strategy.
That was it.
Stay out of the doghouse.
Yeah, and hopefully you don't get to see that DOT officer in his pajamas. But, sure, I've got that in my head. But hey, we're just about wrapping up. Just to be respectful of your time, Scott, what else should somebody know about Avatar that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, I think we covered all the big pieces and parts. So I think, short story, just keep it this simple. If there's something out there that you think you can do a little bit better on your recruiting, compliance, training, retention, and even if it's not from buying one of our tools, we've created online content. So resources for you to download in the forms of ebooks, templates. There's presentations that Mark Gardner, CEO, or myself have gone out and we've recorded. So we're out here trying to be a resource, and if we can help with our tools, outstanding. And if nothing else, some of our free tools may help you at least get some juices going. So that's what I would encourage people to. I'll give you a couple links for folks to download, Chris,
Right.
in the bottom here. And if nothing else, our blog. So if you're at avatarfleet.com, you can subscribe to our blog. and we'll give you guys something. We try to give a tidbit a week in your inbox that's either something to stew on, think about, or a tool to download.
So in the show notes, we're going to have those links for the listeners and watchers to click on and download. So, anything else, Scott?
No, I just want to thank you for the time. It was a lot of fun.
Hey, this is something, as you know, this is relatively new for me, and it's fun. I get to learn, like today, about AvatarFleet, and we've had a relationship in the past. I've got to be in your building in Cleveland, and you've got one heck of a movie studio there, kind of. But, you know, I get to learn more by talking to you today, and I appreciate your time, and I thank you so much for that. Scott, thanks. I hope you loved the show as much as I did. That was a great interview, and I thank you for hanging in there to the end. Please leave us a like, a thumbs up, a review, a comment, a rating if it is in your heart. Thank you so much, and I do really appreciate your time. And join us again next week for another exciting interview.